Welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show. This week we are talking about the thorny subject of credit cards. Love them or loathe them, they are a great tool when they're used in the right way, and they are a nemesis when used in the wrong way. We're going to explore the benefits and weaknesses. We'll show you how you can get yourself out of trouble if you happen to have more credit card debt than is really healthy. And more importantly, we're going to show you a way out of building up that side hustle so that having your credit card as the shoulder to lean on when you need money at those astronomical high rates of interest is not the place you go. See you in the show. Great content in there. Look forward to hosting you. Hey there guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show with me, your host, Andrew Baxter, and of course, as always, my colleague, companion, co-host, and faithful offsider, Mr. Mitchell Laurential.
That's probably the best introduction you've ever given me. Thank you very much.
I've been working on it.
Well, Mr. Baxter, today we're going to just let me pull out my shiny black flash black Amex and chat about the almighty topic of credit cards is today's topic of conversation.
Nice. Credit cards, hey?
Credit cards, the good, the bad, the ugly, and how to get out of debt is the number of topics I'd like to cover within this.
It's a big one, isn't it? And look, they can be the curse of the devil and an absolute nemesis for people, which is a great reason to cover it. There is a lot of bad. There's also a lot of good. And I think in some respects, Mitch, you know, any tool is not a bad thing if it's managed in the right way. And
Sure.
Credit cards are just another tool, and it's a function of how you choose to manage them as to the outcome you get, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. There's a couple more in there as well, but we'll leave those in there for the minute. We don't want to be racking up any bad habits. So I suppose a really good place to start is, you know, and I know it's investing 101 and money 101, but credit cards, what are they and how do they compare to debit cards?
Sure.
Would be a good place to start. So a debit card is something that's attached to your bank account. It's a synthetic form of money. And instead of buying anything, you hit your pay wave, boom, there you go. And that money is directly debited from your bank account.
Sure, so it's your money.
It's your money that's being used. And in some respects, I think they provide a really good bridging gap of, firstly, for people, like my father hates credit cards, and for good reason, But it's a good bridger, I suppose, between someone that's not used to using that and getting used to just using something where you can't get yourself in trouble, because if there's no money in the account, the card stops working. It's
Sure.
as simple as that. You can put a limit on it and so on. So it's a really nice sort of segue in. The great thing about it, it's more convenient than having cash. There's insurance. You haven't got to worry about losing money, for example. If you've lost your wallet, it's all good. And I think one of the things that came out of COVID has been that there's this increasing trend, even more so pushing into the cashless society. Which is, I guess, a way that we're moving. And from a business perspective, not having security issues of money being on the premises, the germs of money as they're handled, risk of staff fraud and theft and so on. It's a great way of really doing things.
I actually took my dad shopping on the weekend last week, and sure enough, went to pull out some cash, and they said, sorry, sir, you can't pay with cash. So I had to find my credit card in there or my debit card and pay with it that way. And same thing, so because of COVID, for the germs, and also because of staff stealing.
Yeah, and it makes an awful lot of sense when you look at it like that. It's just very hard for people that are used to having some folding in their pocket.
The older generation, they love it.
Absolutely. Now, on the other side of the coin, I suppose, is on the credit card side. So a credit card, it functions in a very similar way to a debit card, synthetic. But instead of it being debited from your bank account today, you've got up to 55 days of interest-free credit before you've got to pay that bill.
Wow, okay.
Now, that's a brilliant perk if you know how to use it, and it is an absolute nemesis if you go crazy with your card and start racking up expenses where you just don't simply have the cash behind you to be able to do that.
Well, if you think the average credit card interest rate in Australia is about 19%, just over.
Wow.
So if you miss that 55-day period, you're paying a lot for your money.
That's insane. And when you think about it, with interest rates at 0.25% here in Australia and home loan rates, car finance rates, all those things have come down, but credit card rates have been incredibly sticky up at those higher levels. Massive profiteering going on there for one, which probably has needs to be looked at. But that's not our purpose today. What's the incentive for using a credit card? Well, I guess it's a way of borrowing money in a very convenient way for some people. And look, I've used my credit card for years, or my cards for years, and I think provided you pay them on time, there's no interest, it's interest-free.
Sure.
And so it becomes an incredible tool for you to use. Think about the points that you acquire. I think I've got 9 or 10 million points on my Amex card.
Oh, wow.
You can acquire those, you can use them for various different things, holidays or whatever you might want to do, and it's a great perk to have. There's insurance that goes along with it, all of the different things that they bring some level of benefit to you. But you've got to pay it on time, because if you step over that threshold, all of a sudden it's 16%. It'd almost be worth heading behind the industrial estate and meeting a money lender and getting some urgent payday lending at those kind of rates. It's a huge, huge rate. And unfortunately, it's one of those silent things that can creep up on people
Sure.
where maybe they've been used to spending, maybe they've had a pay cut or something's come along that's reduced their ability to be able to service and pay out that debt fully each month, and they're starting to acquire or accumulate compound interest by just paying that minimum balance off every month, which is an easy trap for people to fall into.
Absolutely. I think it's so scary out there because if you're not careful, you can really get yourself in a lot of trouble. Now, there's about 14.5 million credit cards in circulation, Andrew. Now, given the popularity of them currently and where we're heading, we've just been announced that we're technically in a recession. Josh Frydenberg made his announcement today on our GDP figures. They're going to get more popular. But why are they so popular in the first place?
I think it's an easy way for people to access money. Borrowing today, and if anyone's gone through trying to buy a property recently, the borrowing requirements from the banks right now to buy a property are pretty, I don't think I've ever seen them as stringent, in terms of servicing and lack of willingness to want to lend money. Yet a lot of the credit card companies seem very willing to. Now, it's an unsecured debt. That's why the interest rate is so high versus property, which is secured. There's an asset behind it. But
Sure.
You're buying that pair of Nikes at the weekend. They don't really have a lot of resale value, 3 months down the line if you can't pay your bill. So there's no real asset that kind of sits behind it. And in a way, again, that's why the rates are so high. Yes, moving into recession, I think personally Australia, whilst it may not be the technical measure, in terms of the reality, has probably been sliding into a recession for at least 6 months now, and just that the economic figures back that up. And one of the temptations for people, if you're going through a bit of a tricky time, is to dip into that credit card and smooth it out. The problem is you will have to repay that money, and that could become a very, very significant problem if you lose your job or you've got cash flow issues already that are necessitating that. And again, I don't think credit cards are a bad thing. There's no such thing as a bad credit card. There's bad credit card owners.
Sure.
In just the same way, there's no such thing as a bad dog. There are bad dog owners. Same thing.
Makes sense.
And so there's got to be a level of responsibility if you've got access to funds, not to use them for the wrong thing, because there's good debt and there's bad debt. Buying an investment asset, margin loan, things of that nature, an investment property and so on and so forth, that is good debt. But when it's just gratuitous, I need the latest jumper or the latest shoes or a upgrade to my car or whatever it might be, or I've got to put a deposit on a holiday.
Do you really need it?
Do you need it or you want it? Which we've talked of plenty of times in
Exactly.
terms of values around money. And that is going to be a ticking time bomb. And we've seen the same thing happen with the government rules on super right now. So, during the COVID virus, the government said, look, you can pull 10 this year, 10 next year out of your super and access it if you need to use it. Now, a number of commentators in the marketplace are up in arms to say, it's crazy. People have taken money out of their super and they've used it to renovate their house or buy accessories on their four-wheel drive or to pay for a deposit for next year's holiday. Yeah, that's crazy. Look, it is, and it's foolish, but ultimately, it is their money. And so whether they get it now or whether they get it at retirement age, it is their money.
It's going to the same thing.
Exactly right. And if you choose to access it now and squander it on something stupid, well, that's your responsibility. You can't legislate for people's stupidity. Maybe you can in the US. I know if you look at some, do not use this toaster if you're sitting in water. That's the kind of health warning you might see on something in the US because people aren't thinking. But the reality is you've got to let people think for themselves. And if you want to ratchet up debt, there's a responsibility on the part of the financial institutions, I think, if you start to get behind with your payments, where perhaps your card is suspended. So you can't rack up any further debt. And I think in saying all of that, it's really opened the door to a slightly different conversation around the payment services companies that we're starting to see. Obviously, Afterpay, it's a podcast. It would be remit not to mention it. But if we look at Zip, for example, this week, it's put on over 40% over the last two trading sessions. And this area of buy now, pay later has really started to gouge into the market that credit card companies, particularly Visa and MasterCard, have really enjoyed that duopoly in for so many years. Okay, there's diners, very few people use diners, Amex, but a lot of companies don't take Amex. You've got to have a Visa or MasterCard. And these companies have come in whereby they've made it easier, there's no qualification period, and it's very, very convenient and simple to be able to use that service. And again, if you get into payment difficulties, they've got knockout factors that stop you ratcheting up further debt. They're also unregulated, and that's been a big bugbear.
It's a tough one.
This week we saw, I think it was the consumer advocacy body come out and say, these guys should be regulated, to all intents and purposes of providing loans. They don't. They provide the technology that facilitates a loan. So by using that definition, they kind of step out of the regulatory framework some. But that's why there's been this enormous growth in that space. They're easier for many people to use than a credit card, and they don't attract the interest rates that you see with credit cards.
Well, if you think we spend about $26.5 billion a month on our credit cards here in Australia, which is a lot of money. And, the average Australian has, from my research, around about $4,500 on average in credit card debt. What are some of the worst credit card mistakes you can make? And if you have made them, what do you do to get out?
Gee whiz, I've had a couple of horror stories here. I've had a client who's a fantastic person. I'll leave names and locations out because it's a sensitive issue. Really good person, and they had an enormous amount of credit card debt, not necessarily as a result of themselves, but as a result of a partner that had ratcheted it up. And I'm talking a really substantial, very heavy 7-figure type number in that space. And it's crippling. It almost put them under. My respect for that particular person and the way that they dealt with this situation, amazing, inspiring. It takes a lot to move my needle, and I was like, wow, the way that this guy dealt with this situation. The reality is, if you find yourself with it spiraling out of control, you've got to own it straight away and say, listen, I've got a problem, I've got debt I can't service, and I need help to get there. And all the while, and this is a huge part of what we do within our financial planning business, for example, getting it under control isn't as hard as people think. Unfortunately, they'll look at the debt as a total, and there's no way I can pay that off. All you've got to do is start chipping away at it. Number one, don't be ratcheting up anything new on that.
No, definitely not.
Number two, you've got to have some pain in this to learn from your frivolity of how you've got yourself into that situation in the first instance too. And as you well know, I'm a big believer in pain is a very good motivator for people. So I think, if you find yourself in that situation, recognize it straight away. We're here to help. Our financial planning business, we've got budgeting people in there. We can certainly add some advice and help around that. But stop ratcheting it up. Number two, get paying it down really quickly. And if you've got two lots of debt that you can work with, and let's say for argument's sake, you've got car finance, or let's say you've got a mortgage, and you've also got credit card debt, I'd be inclined to approach my two lenders with low interest rates. Car finance at the moment is 3.5%.
Something like that, yeah.
A mortgage rate is probably comparable. Some mortgage rates touch hard, let's say 4% right now on your mortgage. Yet you've got, 19% average on your car?
19%, yeah.
So have a chat with these guys over here and say, listen, I need to delay something. I need to skip a payment. And in the current environment, provided you're open and transparent with your communication with these guys, and this isn't a get out of jail free card, but it's a get out of jail at some price card.
Okay.
And that is, I want to talk to the bank and say, look, I need to have a payment holiday. I need to reduce my mortgage payment this month. We've got some financial difficulties, whatever it might be, and use that money to get this paid down immediately. Because why would you pay 18% over here
when you can pay 4% over there?
4% over there. So use that money to get this paid off as quickly as humanly possible and eliminate that bad debt. If you're someone that's got a propensity to use your card, and I've actually given this direct advice to a client in the past, they've got a deep freeze at home. I got them to put their credit card, and I got them to put it in the middle of a bucket of water and freeze that bucket of water so they couldn't get the card, and put it in the freezer so it's not touchable.
Wow.
And just to give them some level of barrier to having that free and easy access. It's not going to be in your wallet if it's freezing cold and there's a couple of litres of ice around.
No.
So use that movement of payment over here, and you'll most likely find in the current environment that typically lenders, responsible lenders, banks, people who provide car finance, things like that, are open to that kind of conversation. Don't just do it, talk to them first and explain what you're looking to do, because then you're just moving one problem from one place to another. Once that's under control, get it down so you're not just paying the minimum off, you've got the principal down and the fees are there. Secondly, and I've got a good mate that works in the insolvency space, he's very, very good in that space, is if that debt is out of control, quite often you'll find that these companies have got a duty of care to you to not let it get out of control like that. If they see what's going on, they shouldn't be fronting you credit. And the particular story the client I was mentioning earlier, that particular person, we helped them with a script to go back to the card companies and say, listen, and to be fair, it was a pretty dire situation. This is ridiculous that you allowed this to go for that long. I wasn't aware of the card. You had a duty of care to let me know. Let's arrive at a settlement. So instead of it being this enormous number over here, including compounded 19% interest, let's work out what the principal is. and let's work out a reasonable amount of interest and we'll settle at that and pay it out. And do you know something? That's exactly what happened.
And what did he or she end up paying for their interest rate?
Well, the interest was the same, but they actually wrote back a significant amount of the compounded interest, and that would have been a saving of a few $100,000 in that particular instance.
That's a lot.
You've got to have these conversations, and institutions, since the Royal Commission, are quite sensitive to people that have got challenges, especially where perhaps they may have been slightly aware there was a problem there and chose to turn a blind eye, because for them that compounded interest is free money. And work on a settlement there, and I've seen that done several times. So that's a real life case study. You know, if you owe the bank $300, you're not going to have that conversation. But if it's a more substantial amount, and we can help you with that kind of thing, then we can. So get it paid down, trying to arrive at a settlement if it's out of control and there's been a perceived level of negligence on the part of the lender. Then quickly, with that money, get rid of that cut it up. Do not go back there again. You don't get allowed one of those.
Physically chop it up.
Get rid of it.
Bang, bang, bang.
With that Amex, by the way, it's made of titanium, so you need.
So I heard.
Yeah, you need a welding torch or something to melt it.
Not my thing.
Get rid of that, and if you need anything, revert to the debit card. Put the trainer wheels back on again, so you can responsibly use electronic money.
Okay.
Put it in an account where you might say there's $1,000 in there. Once that grand is gone, boom, that's it. It's dry. There's nothing else on there for another month. So it get your budgeting under control. On this side, then get back up to speed where you need to on there. And if you've not got that debt to support over here, you'll quickly get your payments back on track with these guys. People are open to those conversations in the current environment. And our treasurer has come out and said we're in a recession, and people think recession is a scary thing. Recession is an opportunity, and I've been through a number of these in my trading career and throughout my life, and they can be very, very challenging if you're looking through the wrong lenses. But if you step back and see that in these difficult times, financial institutions aren't necessarily bad, they're open to listening to those kinds of conversations, and you can save yourself thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars if you play that game the right way. You can really set yourself up for success. And it's not the first recession we've had. It won't be the last. You look at what we had. We've had the recession we needed to have here in Australia under the Keating administration. It's been 29 years since the lucky country we're blessed to live in has had any level of financial difficulty and the challenges. And this I really feel for, and I don't say this in a condescending way by any means, but for your generation, everything's been pretty bottom left, top right for the last 20 years.
It sure has.
And now things are getting a little tougher. That coping mechanism, that skill set, that resilience to realize that money's not on demand and sometimes things are tough and tight is a very confronting situation to be in. For me, I think my first-hand taste of that, I graduated in 1992. And the year I graduated, to give you an idea, Shell, the oil company, used to recruit in the order of about 400 or 500 graduates every year in the UK. The year I graduated, they were recruiting 6. That was what the job market was like. You had chronic unemployment in the UK, 4 or 5 million people unemployed in the UK. It's a very, very tough time. And so having seen and felt what that feels like, we're in a much more blessed position here because there are more things that people can do now. The markets have evolved from a trading perspective. Debt has evolved in terms of settlement. There are different ways of paying for things to help with budgets. So whilst things might get tough, and they will get tougher, and I hate to be a prophet of doom, the tools and opportunities that we have at our disposal to negotiate those troubled waters have previously not been available in these circumstances. So really we should be better equipped, not worse equipped. What it requires, of course, is some resilience and common sense, and that's just the same as owning a credit card. Common sense, don't go crackers. It's not free money. You gotta pay it back, and if you don't, that's where problems
You're in
really
trouble.
start.
That makes total sense. It's personal finance 101, right? Pay down your debts and spend less than you earn. It makes total sense. Continuing on with the theme of opportunity, Andrew, and just to cap off on this podcast, obviously for anyone who's maybe in credit card debt, you obviously have a clear need for cash flow, or, you at least want it. You want to go and buy your Nike sweaters or shoes, whatever it may be. So rather than take out a credit card, what's a better way to create cash flow? I mean, we work in the investment space. I'm assuming there's a couple of ideas you've got for us in there.
Yeah, look, if you want a Nike sweater but you don't want to take it out of your principal, you've got 2 choices. Go and buy a trench coat and shoplift. I'm not advocating that for a moment. But yeah, getting a second side hustle is key. And again, as we move into recession times, you cannot simply rely on your job as your only or primary source of income. You have to have a side hustle. And I'm sure as we take this podcast further forward through this year, the side hustle and how to start it and what to do and what they can be is going to be the backbone of a lot of broadcasts, because you have to. It's not a choice, and it's not, oh, it'd be nice to have passive income, it'd be nice to have. It's a must under the current circumstance, and that circumstance is unlikely to change for at least the next 18 months to 2 years. So it's never been more important. And the blessing in all of this, and this might perhaps be a little controversial and certainly opinionated.
Great.
Far be it from us to be opinionated, Mitch, but the reality is, I think the blessing that will come out of this recession is that for probably the last, and I've really noticed this in the seminar space, we meet tens of thousands of people around the traps, we speak to an awful lot of people. And probably for the last 5 or 8 years, really, possibly longer actually, possibly since the GFC and the recovery from the GFC, people have become incredibly complacent. We've had the she'll be right mindset, which is we're blessed to have, we live in the lucky country. The property market keeps going up, the stock market keeps rising, there's full employment. Anything you want, you can have because you can get it on credit. Life is great. But those parameters have really moved around massively. It's not she'll be right, mate. She's not going to be right. Any kind of government bailout has a finite lifetime because the money will dry up when tax dollars start to dry up. Second to that, job insecurity is there. We're already seeing a tick up in unemployment, and it will continue to tick up. Thirdly, we're in a very jittery property market. Now the big push, of course, is to support our tradies and keep the construction industry tracking along. The reality is, property market is looking for a correction of some sort. We've got vacancies, and not all property, don't get me wrong with this, but so many investment properties, you've got 1 in 7 properties now vacant in Sydney and Melbourne because so many investment properties have been built. There's an oversupply there, and sure, we've relied on population growth. That's the story that any property spruikers, as population growth, you've got to get property. We all need somewhere to live. Very true. We don't need 3, 4, 5, 6 houses. And when you start to see that come back, that property goes up every year is not going to be the case. If you've got negatively geared property, you're in massive trouble because it's going to be empty. So it will become negatively geared. If you're in positively geared, it probably will become negatively geared either as your rent drops to try and attract a tenant in, or secondly, the vacancy is there. Now that's okay if you've got a tax problem, but it's a real nightmare if you don't have a job because you still got to pay that loan. And if you don't have the tax to offset your negative gearing against, you're stuffed. And so there are a lot of negative factors out there at the moment, not to put a depressing spin on this, but to say those negative factors create opportunity. Diamonds are made from pressure, and so are opportunities. And this negative, bad outlook that most people have got can so easily be turned into a side hustle and capitalized on. We've had some of the worst trading conditions known to man over the last couple of months, and our clients have been consistently, regularly banking great profit because they took the time to build a side hustle. And there's no reason why anybody, literally anybody listening to this broadcast can't do the same, because it is a process. The trouble is you've got to want to do it. It'd be nice to have a side hustle, or must you have one? Well, I'm afraid the time is coming, the bell is ringing.
You have to have one.
You have to have one. It's not an option, it's not a luxury.
And for those people, how would they get in touch with us?
Hit us up, social media, plenty of places to find us. Australian Investment Education, we're all over Facebook. Hit us up at our website, Australian Investment Education, Money and Investing right here. Follow us on Instagram. Reach out to us. We're not hard to find.
Andrew, look, really good to get your advice today. I think there's so many good points in there, and it's a big wake-up call for a lot of people because the time is now to make those changes.
I hope it's a wake-up call, because by being asleep at the wheel, that's where problems happen. This is the time. Dig the well before you need the water.
Any other parting words before we wrap up?
I think that's about time. I'm almost out of cliches. I can't stress it. It is not an option. It is a must. It's not a luxury. It has to happen. And if you're someone that's sitting on the fence, or maybe you've been in that comfortable space, here's my parting words then. What's the opposite of success? And it's not failure. It's called being comfortable.
Right. Well, there you go. Do that or get a black Amex. There's the two options.
Yeah, we can help with both.
Yeah. Andrew, look, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to get your insight into this. I really do appreciate it. I know there's plenty of good information out there for our listeners, so thank you very much.
My pleasure, Mitch. Well, guys, we hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure you leave a review and a rating, and we'll look forward to speaking with you next week.